If I had to put one reason the Necromancer is the #1 class in the game, it would be this. In my personal opinion, the best class in all of Diablo Immortal is the Necromancer, but instead of just saying that, I want to break down the reasons why today, because you've probably seen this discussion before where we have tier lists and all these things, and you always see Necromancer all the way at the very top. And you might be wondering, well, does Necromancer just have way too good of damage? Are they really good in PvE or really good in PvP? What is it exactly? Well, today is what we're going to do is we're going to be answering that question. So I'm going to start with a few ways. I'm going to talk about the skills. I'm going to talk about the modifiers for the skills. We're going to talk about PvE and PvP, and we're going to go down the list and cover it all. So here we go. First and foremost, what I want to do is talk about the Necromancer skills, because I do personally believe the Necromancer skills are a large part of the reason, obviously, the Necromancer is so good. First of all, let's go through the primary and basic attack. Soulfire is basically an AoE. It hits somebody, does damage around it, and Bone Spear is really good in PvP because it pierces enemies, so you can hit multiple of them. They don't have to be just on top of each other and has a long range, but more importantly, it has a modifier with one of the legendaries that does let bleed over time with the Bone Maw, so you can sort of use it to cancel people's bandages, etc., if they're not paying attention to that bleed over time. Both of these are pretty good. The Bone Spear is a quicker animation. Now, all of these moves, I'm not going to talk about each and every one of them. What I want to do is break down what exactly about these moves make it good. Well, if you look through all these moves, there's really only 2, maybe arguably 3 bad moves, and all of the other ones can be viable in some builds. What are the bad moves? Well, Grim Scythe isn't really that great because all it really does is generate more damage, and you have to have an item in order to do that, which can give you 10%, and there's all these caveats. You have to hit multiple people, etc. Whereas Corpse Lance isn't that great because, in my personal opinion, it's single target damage, which isn't as important as AoE, and when there's corpses around the boss, you use the corpses to do single target damage, and congrats, you're out of the corpses because you're trying to kill a boss, so you're not getting more Corpse Lance damage, whereas Corpse Explosion is kind of constant AoE, or you can use the Rotspur Shoulders to do poison over time, which would trigger some of the legendary gems, etc. So Corpse Lance kind of gets overrated, and then Bone Spirits is basically not that great. It's one of our better over time single target, even though it goes through people and pierces, it's almost one of our better single target damage dealing because you consistently do damage. Not a good move though. I'm going to be honest, it's not really that great because the Bone Spirits to make it bounce isn't really that good either. So because of that, those moves aren't that great, but all of these other moves are completely viable either in the PvP or PvE build, and is arguably really good with some of them. For instance, like Bone Wall in PvP with the Backbone, or like Triple S tier, or Bone Armor in PvE with things like Parting Gifts, okay? So there are certain moves that are just completely triple S tier, and then obviously we can get into the skeleton mages, etc. You can see I really build for skeleton mages, and the golem's good and all that. So basically the skills for the Necromancer are all except the ones I mentioned, either S tier or A tier. All of the moves are basically viable, but it doesn't really end there, because when you go into like things like the legendaries, and let me teleport back to West March while we're talking about this, but as you go into things like the legendary items, all of the legendary items that alter it, except a couple, like the Bone Spirit Bounce I already mentioned, most of the legendary items are either viable or can be used in a particular build. Because, well, maybe the shoulders are a little bit more of a scenario where we could say the shoulders are a little bit more nicher, but most of the legendary items you can use some kind of use for, like either the Dark Curse Guided Magnet Pants, which will make people attack faster. I've used those in the pants, or you can use the Proximal Fear Pants if you have the Proximal Fear instead, and then you have a different kind of build, and now maybe you can use Chip of the Stone Flesh. Basically, there is a reason to use almost all of them here, and I've pulled up here to the Essence Transfer so I can show you as we go through these. Skeleton Champions replaced with Archers, usable. Having Skeletons blow up is usable in a Corpse Lance, single target damage, really weird type of build. It's very niche. It's for PvP, actually. Command Skeletons with a Skeleton Captain is really good when you're over the power of the overworld in which you are farming. The Bone Spikes that cause bleeding damage is actually not bad in PvE and can be used in Challenge Rifts. For instance, when you're kiting melee-based Challenge Rift people, the Bone Spikes is basically the best PvP helmet. Skeleton Mage Duration I use in PvE consistently. The Command Golem duration I've used for a long time before because it makes it where the golem's uptime's almost 100%. There's really only a couple of these I haven't really found much use for, but it could be the same thing where I go through here. Rotspur is one of the best AoEers if you're looking for AoE dot damage. Lone Preserver is the only way to really have consistency C in PvE. You can go down the list and make a case for almost all of these, and I've used almost all of these. Even the new Bone Armor one is good. Same with the chestplate. I could go down the list and all of these. All of these, except maybe the weapons are a little bit on the weaker side, if we're being honest, but you could make a case for basically all of the legendary items, which means that, okay, so most of the skills are good. good. Most of the legendary items are at a minimum usable. Some are triple S tier though, like God tier, okay? Like way, 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 way better, like Desolatoria, for instance, for the weapon, or Vesper Guard, I think is quite good too. So what do we have? We have the core of the character, which is strong. We have good skills backed up with good legendary items, okay? But then the way those skills are implemented, meaning the way they actually work in mechanics, are top tier too. For instance, like the Backbone in PvP or the Rot Spur in PvE works the best way you would think it would work. Like the Rot Spur works consistently where the damage triggers consistently, so you're having multiple attempts in order to be able to proc your Seeping Bile, or in PvP, the Zoom In's Backbone basically interrupts almost anything. You can knock Crusaders out of the horse with the Backbone, for instance. You can, there's all kinds of crazy stuff you can do with the Backbone, and even the non-Backbone version of the normal wall, you can literally just block walls where people can't walk through pathways even. They do that in PvE. So every version of this skills, and this is kind of where I'm going to stop talking about skills because I've been talking about a lot, but basically every version of this skill is done in a way that the skill is not useless. Whereas some of the other skills I've played in some of the other classes is like, wow, that's a really good skill, but it's just a little too short of a range, or it has some weird bug with it, or there's something that makes some of the skills I like not so great, like Mystic Allies and the Monk. It's great, but it feels like it has a really long cooldown because I don't get used as much, where maybe, you know, I need all these things like the cooldown, or to make it not that long, and I need the additional duration of how long it lasts, and all these things just to make the move where it feels like somewhat viable, where it feels with the Necromancer, basically all of the moves work the way you would want them to work. Okay, so you have a solid core for a character right off the bat. But on top of all of the moves being good, and basically most of the legendary items being good, they're also extremely viable in multiple versions of the game. So if you're going to a dungeon, you're going to have good AoE clear. Your minions will be fine with AoE clear. You can Molten Golem on top of people. You can put a Ray Mage down. You're going to be fine with killing the mobs. But when you actually get to the boss itself, there is a couple builds that are absolute boss nukers. Okay, absolute boss nukers where you can have all your summons up and then guided by maggots in order to nuke through the boss. So you have really good AoE and single target damage. You have it all in PvE, okay? Originally, I didn't think the single target damage was that good. Granted, you can use Echoing Shade, but that's a pay-to-win mechanic, and I don't really want to get into the pay-to-win stuff as much as just stuff that's relevant for everybody. I really think their single target damage is much better than I originally anticipated, especially when you build more for that single target damage, because even by building single target damage, some of the moves just do into AoE anyway, because once again, the hero is so good. So you have PvE viability, but the PvP viability is even more insane. When you have that PvP build that allows the Backbone, okay, you have the Fear as well that does constant CC. You have the double knock-up bone spikes that is not diminished returns. I mean, you can hit people twice in a row with it, then fear them, then backbone them, and you can CC people for so long. Even if you get good at weaving in the backbones in between, you can even get auto attacks in there. I'm talking the combos are like Super Smash Brothers level with the CC on this guy in PvP. So we have undeniably S tier in PvP. Like, no one can deny the S tier, maybe the best hero in the game in PvP, just because of how strong CC is with the way the game itself works. Not so much even the Necromancer, it's just because CC is so strong in this game too. Like, maybe you're having a hard time killing it well, but if you can CC him, you can kill him, right? Because of that, that also makes Necromancer even better. So we have, he's good at PvE and he's good at PvP. But then here's the other thing, okay? And this is what made me switch back to it. When you're overworld farming, like if I go to the Realm of Damnation and I go to the last Visage waypoint and I'm like just farming in a circle, the Necromancer, in my personal opinion, there's been some debate that it's the mage. I think Velcha was making the point that it's a mage, and I could see his point. But in my personal opinion, I believe the Necromancer is the best overworld farming class, which is what is the most efficient thing to do in the game, as well as what you do most in the game, because it is most efficient and because you need to do it the most. Everyone needs to farm Paragon levels, because what I do is I just drop my mage, that mage, and whoever's left over will kill that entire pack. I don't need to worry about it. I can walk away. So when I'm walking in a circle, it is the closest thing to having an auto button in this game, because I just walk around, I place these mages where I know the packs will spawn, and then I just keep going. If I'm running out of mages, I just throw in my skeletons there, increase their attack speed or whatever, and so be it. You just keep going between that and the shrines and everything. You really have quite enough. It is the lazy, easy man's farm. It works fantastic on the controller. I've been using using the Razer Kishi. None of the moves have any problems on the controller. So even if you're on like PC with a controller, if you're on like an emulator with a controller, if you're on a Android or iOS phone with a controller, it will work. And even without a controller, I played most of the gameplay without a controller because I just recently got a controller for my phone to figure out that it actually works good. It works fantastic with touch controls too. The Necro is consistent, which is why it's so good. If I had to put one reason the Necromancer is the #1 class in the game, it would be this, okay? Necromancer is consistent across all games forms. I can do any of the Shadows content. I can do any of the Immortal content. I can do any of the PvE content. I can do any of the PvP content. I can fully endorse the Necromancer in every aspect of life within this game. So when you pick it as your main class, there is no part of the game that is highly unenjoyable like I've had with other classes. Because some of the other classes, maybe they're way more fun at a certain thing. Like the Monk was way more fun when I'm in PvP because I'm hopping around, teleporting, it's got all these cool dashes. But just because it's fun doesn't make it better. And on top of it, I'm not always going to have fun on the Monk. If I go do other things like PvE, Overworld Farming, it's not as good as my Necro. Whereas my Necro, it is fun and S tier good in everything. So I'm never I'm not becoming bored, but I'm also not being inefficient. Like I'm being efficient and enjoying it at the same time. If I had to really put my finger on it, I would say the Necromancer lets you do what you want to do in the game without feeling bad for playing your character. And if there's anything I feel about in these type of games, you have to be able to connect with your character and feel like your character is not holding you back. Only the amount of time or money, if we're being honest, that you spend in these games will actually pay you out. And the Necromancer never gets in the way with that. And so for me, my heart's always going to be on the Necro, at least until that Blood Knight comes out.